Good evening. Yeah, I'm missing. I call this meeting to order. All members of the board are present except Dr. Spicer and Mr. Bascavia. Mr. Matursky, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be advised that in the event of fire emergency and an evacuation should be necessary, an alarm will sound. Please note all marked emergency exits and evacuate well away from the building. At this time, we request everyone turn their cell phones and electronic devices to silent. Thank you. Moving on to items 3A and 3B, budget development and air conditioning capital project information. Dr. Brownhall.
Thank you very much, Board President Singh. So I won't waste much time, and I will turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, our Interim Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Management Services, Mr. Tom Matursky.
Thank you, Dr. Brownhall. The information I'll share tonight, we will start with the budget information. And although this is similar to what was presented earlier in March, I want to go through the entire presentation for our community. In the event some have not seen the process that really began back in January. So the first report you're seeing is for our program continuation expenses. So what this means is essentially these are the items that we need to sustain what we currently have in this current fiscal year. And its report is provided into two sections. The left side is the one we're working on for the next budget, the 2024-25 budget, and the right side is a look forward. It's always important for us to keep our eye on the future, and one of the things that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that following year, but you can see that not all of the expense items are the same or the same amounts as what can be seen in the current year we're working on. So going through the first three items, they are all related to human resources, and they include salaries, Social Security benefit, and health insurance. And they total about $6 million. And as the Board of Education knows, our salary and benefits really account for about 70% of our budget. So that's why this is also a very large increase. And the one thing I do want to point out is, as reported back earlier in March, the health insurance amount is down $2.3 million from what was reported in February. And that really is due to the new information we received as we've developed the budget and really what we found in February leading into March. Our BOCES budget, that increase of $1,170,500, that item is for a number of items that we purchased through BOCES, and I want to make a point that all of those items, or the majority of those items, are aided by New York State. So about 60% of those expenses we get back in the form of aid. But they include everything from student service items, special education services, some technology items, instructional software, and administrative items that allow us to meet mandated regulations. Bus transportation is increased $2,360,700. And as I've mentioned in the past, that is a very large number this year, but it also is due to the fact it's the first year of our new contract with Student Transportation of America. And it really represents the increases that have occurred in the transportation industry over the last really 3 to 4 years. I just want to point out, as I said, I'm not going to spend much time on the column to the right, but you can see that increase is significantly less in the next year. So this is really more of a one-time increase. And the last item listed there is our cybersecurity efforts. We're continuing to enhance our cybersecurity, and so there's a $250,000 increase. So that results in an increase of about $9.4 million, with the working budget in this section of $232,756,054. That's 4.19% increase over our current 2023 budget. So moving to this next slide, I want to share with you that these are enhancements. So this is not currently in our programs in this current fiscal year. And we're looking at just one area, special education, and specifically into adding 4 self-contained classes, 2 at the high school level, 1 at the middle school level, and 1 at the elementary level. And then again, this was new at our March meeting, earlier March board meeting. We have a $525,000 reduction, and this is in our principal payoff area. We had the ability to make a larger payment back in the last fiscal year. As a result of that, we're able to reduce this, and that helps offset some of the increases, especially our transportation expense increase. So where that brings us right now for our working budget is we have an increase of $9,352,571, total budget amount of $232,740,574. It's 4.19%. And again, the key items down below here are really listed as comparable to what we presented in February. I already mentioned the major adjustment to health insurance. We had also some additional salary reductions that we put in place of $250,000, which was really over and above what we previously put into the number, which we're really planning on 20 retirements, which is kind of a normal number that we get. But we had a few more, so we're able to reduce that budget substantially by $250,000. The increase in transportation, and I think most importantly, we are able to bring the budget to budget increase down from 5.22% to 4.19%. Now, as we move forward to the revenue side, I'm beginning with the tax cap calculation, which really is the impact to the tax levy. This calculation has really 3 major components. The first component is the growth factor, which is provided to us by the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance. And that really is due to assessment growth from the towns in our area. So that's a multiplication item against our current tax levy. We then have the CPI rate, and you can see it's 2%. We hear about the tax cap being a 2% tax cap. That's really where that comes from. It doesn't mean the tax cap levy increases 2%. It means the CPI increases 2%. And then below, you'll see that there's a carryover that was approved by the New York State Office of the State Comptroller. That amount of $1,853,636, that is due to the fact that last year we did not levy a lot of foundation aid last year. So as a result of receiving that aid, we were able to decrease the levy to our community and save them monies on their tax bills. So what that provides us is the following. We have a maximum increase on the levy that would be able to be $5,659,000. That is referred to then with the levy as a tax levy limit amount of $145,604,000, which would be 4.04%. And that would be considered under the tax cap. However, what we are projecting is an increase significantly lower than that. We're looking at $144,100,000 levy, which is 2.97% increase. And that would be an increase of the levy of $4,155,000. And it's actually 26.57% below what we actually could levy and still be under the tax cap. The rest of the revenue, again, some of these items are smaller, but I'm just going to concentrate on the major areas. First of all, on the state aid side, we're actually almost having a total increase now of $4.9 million. So that's a very substantial one. And the difference here from going back to February is we considered what has been discussed and is being discussed at the state legislature level. We have seen some of their proposals as of late, and we do believe there's going to be an increase to what we receive from the governor. So as a result of that, we put additional $646,000 in our foundation aid. Again, as I go through the budget process, I always say that we're looking at every single revenue item as well as the expense items. And we did have to make a reduction in our building aid, state aid level. And so that went down by $300,000, but it still is a net increase of $346,000 over what was in February. The other areas, again, what you're seeing here on these increases on the right side, they're over what was done on February. I'm going to highlight the total increases. So in regard to our sales tax, that's going up $1,250,000 over the current year. And again, we're getting strong sales tax returns. And right now, with the information we have on the economy, that is looking to continue into the 24-25 school year. Similarly, interest earnings, we have been able to achieve some very good CD investments. And even though we know that the rates will drop somewhat from the Fed, we don't believe there's going to be a significant percentage drop that would impact this budget, which is an increase of $2,860,000. And then really lastly, you're seeing, again, the $1.3 million decrease in the tax levy from what was presented in February and that. Lastly, I want to highlight again the decreases that we see in that last section, appropriate fund balance, as well as reserve allocations. And these are items that when we received our comptroller's audit, there was no problem with the allocations, but they did recommend that in the future we should reduce them. So we're doing just that. We're reducing those allocations, and the total reduction there is $4,274,000. So what we have here is a balanced budget. And again, the budget to budget increase is 4.19%. And you can see that the tax levy increase is 2.97%. And the CPI is 4.1%. So we're definitely under the CPI when it comes to our levy. A little bit of new information. These are some estimates done for the tax rates. This is something, though, that I want to put a little bit of a caution toward, because the calculation of tax rates is very complex because it includes a lot of different items that the school district does not control. The only item the school district controls is the tax levy. So the equalization rate is set by New York State, and it's really due to what the assessors provide and whether they're at fair market value. And so that's a major contributing factor. And then the final assessed values are, again, controlled by the town assessors. So this was done to show what would be the change in the tax rates if everything were the same as last year, with the exception being that the equalization rates go up to 100% for both Amherst and Clarence. And the information that I have is that's what will happen. And the information I also have for Cheektowaga is that it will remain at 91%. So a couple key things here. You're seeing that the rates go down substantially. So the tax rates for Amherst would be about $11.97. The tax rate for Clarence, again, $11.97. The estimated changes are a little different because between Amherst and Clarence, because one was at 62% equalization rate and the other was at 80%. The point I want to make in the middle is, you see with Cheektowaga having no change, that increase of 38 cents is 2.97%. That equals our tax levy increase, and that's the way it should be. So this next information item is really kind of showing you what it would be for a house that has a new assessment at $250,000. So you can see what I've done here is, again, all the other items remaining stable. I've shown how the tax rates are actually equalizing the assessed value change. So in this situation, you're seeing that Amherst and Clarence are at $250,000. You have the revised rates, and you can see if you go to the estimated tax, they're both at $2,992. Cheektowaga, on the other hand, Their value is at 91%. So what they're seeing on their tax bill is not $250,000, it's $227,500. And so that's why they have a higher rate. And again, there's some rounding in this example, but it equals about the same, the $2,996. So again, that's an example. Now, one thing I have not done, which I've done in the past, is I would show if you have a house valued at $250,000, what's the change that you're going to expect? It's almost impossible to do that this year due to the fact that once you get all the assessed values and the reallocations, your tax bill should go down. However, there's these complicated factors don't really allow it. But what I will say to you is this: if you had a value of $405,000, $250,000 last year, you would now have an equalized value at 100% of $405,000. So what I'm trying to say is that if your tax bill showed $250,000, your new value is $405,000, and if that's the case, with a reduction in the tax rate, you would not pay any difference. Okay, so with the exception of 2.97% for the levy, that would be the only increase. It's just not possible to provide you a more than an accurate item. So the summary here on this is as follows. We have a working budget of $232,740,574, which is 4.19%. Our proposed levy is $144,100,000, 2.97%. We're under the tax cap by $1,504,000. Our state aid is up about $4.9 million, and we have a no deficit right now. Our expenses budget equals our revenue budget, so we're in balance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matursky. We can move on now.
Dr. Lippman had a question.
We're going to do questions as soon as both presentations are done.
Okay. All right, continuing on, this is for an additional supplemental funding proposition, and it is for the air conditioning capital project at the elementary level. Again, I'm going to go through the entire proposition for our community. Some people may not have seen the earlier presentation in March. So I wanted to begin here by sharing where we are now and how we got here. So we began really planning this idea of a air conditioning capital project in 2021, which turned into the 2022 elementary air conditioning proposition. We had really three major goals when we started the process. The first was to air condition all classrooms that did not have it in the school district. We then were also going to look at improving our ventilation, really our filtration efficiency. And we were going to make sure that this was energy efficient. So when we came to the proposition date, what we had was the fact that to do air conditioning at all three levels, elementary, middle, and high, it was really cost prohibitive at that point to keep everything really without an impact to the tax levy, to the budgets, or in that regard at all. So we did not want to impact the budget. So as a result, we said we're only going to concentrate on the elementary schools. We did include ventilation and filtration improvements in this. It was energy efficient. And some of this also included some other work, including the removal of the casework that was original to the building. And if you've been in our elementary buildings, along the window walls, there is what we call univent systems. And then alongside them is the casework I'm speaking about. And since the univents were coming out, all the casework would be removed and replaced. So the funding mechanisms for this, again, this was all budget neutral, no increase on our taxes back in 2022, and it still is this case today. We were going to use capital reserve funds in the amount of almost $23.9 million. We're going to use a budgetary outlay, $1.5 million in 2 years, which would equal a total of $3 million. And then we're going to issue debt in the amount of $37,301,159 for a proposition amount of $64,119,318. And so this was approved by our community on May 17th, 2022. After we received your approval, that's when we tell our construction manager, our architects, our engineers to begin designing the details. That takes a significant amount of time. We've gone through a lot of different scenarios and came up with a final plan, which was submitted to the New York State Education Department as required back in May 2023. We then received approval on October 6th, 2023, and we were ready to go out for bid. We did our bid, open bid process. We opened bids on December 5th, and we were over budget. And then the Board of Education was requested and did reject all bids on January 9th, 2024. So what were the determining factors? We were over budget significantly, $22,902,604. When we received our bids, we had lengthy conversations with the contractors that bid, and we found out a lot of things that were impacting it. And really the most critical item was the availability of labor. Even back when we were doing our security project, we knew that there was really a lack of extra labor in the construction industry. And with the construction of several high-profile projects, including the Bills Stadium, this has made things extremely worse than what it had been in the past. There was an article in the Buffalo News, that's a link below. We were not the only school district negatively impacted by this. Many districts in our area that went out for bids in the last, I'd say, 4 to 5 months have experienced a similar situation. We also found that the material costs were higher than expected, and we had a lot of work scheduled on second shift to minimize the impact to our instructional program, and that had also a significant increase on the total bids that we received. So we then went through a 4-step process to address what we were going to do here to try and bring the budget in line with what we would do to perform all work in the elementary schools. The keys to lowering the cost were certainly to review our system design, reduce the labor amount of work that we're doing, to also review the materials, the equipment we were specifying, think out of the box, and really develop bid day alternates, deductions, that is. And so we came up with design changes. And so some of these out of the box thinking were a major item was to use exposed ductwork. And this is more what I would consider a commercial look. So in the original project, just as in this room here, all the ductwork was going to be above the ceiling. Now, to do this project, all the ceilings would have to come down. That's expensive. Plus, when you get above ceilings in schools, there's a lot of conflicting items. And so you would be having to deal with that. If you have the space, which we do, to put the ductwork along the walls below the ceilings, you're going to save a tremendous amount of expense. And that was one cost-cutting item that we put in here. We also were going to reduce the second shift labor, and how we were going to do that is we're going to utilize swing space in the classrooms in the schools, essentially taking 2 classrooms out of service at a time, taking over a space within the building so that those 2 classrooms would have temporary teaching space, and then we'd be able to get those classrooms turned back around in about a month. That's a kind of a situation that we feel is workable. And so that will definitely save the second shift work. And so that was an adjustment we made. We also adjust the location of equipment and the type of equipment. Again, looking to reduce the runs for ductwork and all of that. So there's a number of items that we did to try and improve efficiency in this revised design. So the next piece here in step 2 was to develop bid day alternates, and this is deduct alternates. We are hopeful that we don't have to accept any of these, which what you'll see on the next slides, but we have to be realistic in that we don't know what the bid market will be. So in order to get the main pieces of the air conditioning done in this project, we have to be ready to have these deduct alternates, which include really removing air conditioning from gyms, cafeterias, libraries, kitchens, removing the boilers that would be added, the new heating boilers for the schools, and the hot water tanks in the schools. So the next piece is the funding mechanisms. And this is really going to utilize our existing savings accounts, our existing reserves. So we're looking to add $19,960,000 from these reserves. And the key here is by doing this, we are going to stay with what we said initially to our community way back in 22 to not increase the tax levy, not increase future budgets, not increase tax rates with any of this project work. So that's what these reserves will do because they're currently in our savings accounts. At the same time, so there's no increase in the taxes at all or future budgets. It is going to use about 100% of our district reserves at this point in time. So that is certainly something that could have an impact on a future project that might be 5 years down the road. In addition to that, we're going to recommend allocating $3 million as a budgetary outlay. And this would be just 1 year, the 24-25 budget. So the budget that you saw in the past presentation, these dollars are actually available they're in our debt service, and we have a level debt service model, which means that that amount stays the same throughout every budget. And we take on new debt or capital projects when we have the debt service available to pay for the debt of that project. So because of the fact that we did a pay down, because of the fact that this project is now going to be pushed out a bit, we have the ability to use $3 million without impacting the tax levy, the tax rate, just a reallocation for this project. However, it has to go back to the level debt service the next year in the 2025-26 year. So step 3, as I said, is what this is doing is it's providing information on what we're doing when it comes to the total funding. I think I went the wrong way. Step 4, that's the $3 million. So let's go to one additional item that we were able to add. I mentioned early on that we were removing those univents and taking the cabinetry out and replacing it. There's about 3 rolls of asbestos tile in that area that would have to be abated in the majority of the classrooms. When we did the initial planning in 21, we looked at trying to do all the asbestos tile removal in those classrooms, but it became cost prohibitive. But by the fact that we're looking to add these dollars at this point, it really makes sense for us to do this project right and remove that tile at this point in time. And so that was one thing that we did add back that's in the funding mechanism that you just saw. So that provides us an additional fund outlay of $22,960,000. And it would be not impacting, again, any budgets, any tax levies, any tax rates in the future because of how that funding is structured. Again, it's basically capital reserves, which are savings accounts and dollars that are currently in our budget that, due to the way this project has been postponed, will not be needed for the next year. So, additional funding summary, pros and cons. I think that you certainly want to start with the fact that this would allow us to add air conditioning in the elementary schools as was originally planned, going back to the approval of our proposition in 2022. I've said it a number of times tonight. I'll say it again. There's no tax rate or tax levy impact to these changes. There's no impact by doing this to the future budgets as well. And it is allowing us to, again, remove the asbestos in the elementary classrooms for all of the classroom areas rather than just around those 3 rows by the window walls. On the con side, certainly we're using, pretty much all of our reserves at this point in time. The cost of the project has increased exponentially. And the fall bidding pricing is something that we feel with this budget, we're able to control to a point of working the project through. However, there's always the unknown there. And then that's why I say the funding does not guarantee that all scope of work will be done, because we never know what's going to happen when we open bids on that bid opening day. So again, going to what other alternatives would be available here. We could move forward without the funding to air condition half the schools, 3 of 6 elementaries. You could always postpone this project indefinitely and evaluate it after the major construction projects are done in this region. You could proceed with really the current funding and just do work in 3 buildings, and then maybe halfway through that project, see where everything is at and decide, how much additional funding may be needed at that time to complete the remaining 3 schools. And you could also decide to abandon the capital project completely. So a final summary here is we're requesting new funding of $22,960,000. It doesn't add any debt to the school district. It doesn't impact tax rate or future budgets with any type of an increase or tax levies. It allows that asbestos floor tile to be done. And really, at this point in time, with what's going on in the construction industry, with the labor, with cost of materials, it probably is the best time if you want to complete this project to move it forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Machersky, for the budget presentation and the request for additional funding for the air conditioning project. I turn it back over to you, President Singh.
Any questions from the board? Dr. Littman?
No, Marquez, I'll wait.
I don't mind. Oh, sure. 2 questions. I have to open up my computer because I wrote it down. So, and I talked to Mr. Machersky beforehand and told him I was going to ask him this general question I always ask at any budget meeting when it's presented by the CFO or whoever's in charge of finances. In your professional opinion and based on historical trends, do you feel this is a responsible budget projection, meaning the revenue has not been overestimated and the expenditures have not been underestimated?
I would say that that's true, and I would say it because our budgets must always consider the unimaginable. And the unimaginable is that you have some revenue streams don't come to fruition, and you have higher expenses in some areas as well. And if you don't prepare a budget looking that way, I think you're not being protecting the instructional programs of the school district. And you also are not being fair to future budgets, because every single budget that's done in the school district should not be done looking at that year only. The key of budgeting is to always be looking multiple years. And so that's what has positioned the district for many years to where it is right now, in that we have some abilities within the budget that they're reasonable, which is what you are really asking. It's reasonable. And yet at the same time, it's providing the assurances that we need and that our instruction program needs and that our community wants to fund all the programs they have going on now and into the future.
That was going to be one of my follow-up questions. Because the day after this budget is adopted, we start working on the following budget. In your opinion, I know you'll be here on a part-time basis, if that, and we're grateful to have you at any time. How do you think this looks then for the year after?
I think that looking again, the key areas of the budget are always going to be your salary and benefits. 70% or so is that. And so you're going to be looking to know what your increases are going to be in your labor contracts. And I know there's a couple of major ones that will be coming due. So that is going to be an important ingredient in future budgets. The other thing I would say is what's happening with the economy. I think you're going to see, inflation's going to be stable, which is a good thing. At the same time, I think the revenue concern that I have is on the state level. They're using, from what I see, they want to use a lot of rainy day funds in this next fiscal year for them to increase funding in areas. If they were to do that, your state aid increase will be less next year. So now you're going to have to rely on other revenue categories and possibly have lower increases. So all of that comes together, and what you said is correct. Everything is integrated when it comes to budgeting. It's your revenues, it's your expenses, it's knowing that you have some leeway in some codes, and then other codes you don't. So you have to have a give and take, and that occurs on both sides of the budget. If you really think about it, we're looking not at a $232 million budget. We're looking at a $4,064,000 budget. That's what we're
Increase
budgeting.
from last budget
Right.
to this.
Well, it's your expense side
Right,
plus your revenue side, because that's what we're really budgeting. The community, it's a balanced budget. That's why it's the correct number is 232. So I guess I would say to you that I feel we're in a very good position for the future. I think we've got a solid revenue estimates in this budget. I think we have good estimates on the expenditure side. And I think we've seen that we've made some adjustments in both areas as the budget development process has gone on. And I think that's going to help the district in the future. So yes, I think we're a very good budget.
And I have
going forward.
one last question, if I may, while I'm on a roll. Thank you for the picture behind the numbers, because the picture behind the numbers is almost as important as the numbers themselves. We're not looking for a good answer. We're looking for the right answer, and you've always provided it, and I thank you. My next question is on the disabled veterans tax exemption. How do we compare with other districts in the amount we grant? And can we look into the fiscal impact of increasing the amount of that exemption and seeing how much it would impact the revenue, or what revenue then gets dispersed to the general population? I think we can do a 10 or 15% reduction on their assessed value, which then would lower their tax increases. So do you know if we're at that 15% or 10%, and can we go over that? Can you give me any information?
I would have to go back and see really what the board approved and what level that was at. I remember us doing it. I know that when we initially did some exemptions, and I think it was the earlier exemption to veterans, not that one, because there were several ones that the board approved. I did do a calculation that showed what the impact would be. I will have to go back, probably contact Erie County. They have the information on how many people are in that other level, and then see what that increase would be and what it would be in a calculation.
The board would make that decision whether they want to grant it an additional benefit.
Correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Littman?
But, I just want to just comment that both Mr. Matursky and Mr. Mann are both correct here. But, the idea that the decisions we make at this table are passed on to future boards. They have to deal with the decisions that we make. And the other part is we want to do what's right for, our students, our teachers, and the community. And I need to know if we're trying to make this decision tonight, or a timeline will give us a little more time to decide how we want to resolve this issue, because it's pretty complex and I have a number of questions. So I guess my question is, will we leave the table tonight having made that decision, or will we have more time to make sure it does get on the ballot? Because again, with Board of Education candidates coming April 21st, and those names not being on the ballot. So do we have time to further gather information and work on this, or?
Are you referring to the propositions regarding the air conditioning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, because I have a number of questions, but I don't know if they all need to be resolved tonight, or are we going to have more time? So I guess the question is, will we leave this table today with that decision made?
That is part of the timeline, to have it
Okay,
decided.
well, that's my note about the timeline.
We're talking about the air conditioning, right?
Yes,
Correct.
yes. Well,
But ask your question.
okay, well, it goes back to how we want to structure this. We're looking at this and saying we want to add money to a proposition that was already passed, but the board has rejected. Because again, right, the board rejected the bids.
Mhm.
So I guess my question is, should we put this all back into one package, bring it back out to the community versus adding it as a supplemental? And I guess that's my opening question. What is the most appropriate way to deal with that? Because again, I look at it as, it was, if the board rejected something, well, the board rejected it, now we're going to add to the rejection. It just seems illogical.
Right, the board just rejected the bids. The
Yeah.
board did not reject the project.
I understand
They
that.
rejected the bids, so
Yeah.
the project is still viable, right?
The money for the whatever project.
Correct, the initial amount, absolutely.
Yeah.
So all you're asking the community to do is
add.
approve the additional amount.
Yeah, just for the sake of transparency, we want to make sure the community understands that in total, this is the amount, and that's just, I want to be clear on
That's
that.
why, right, and
Yeah.
that's why Tom did that presentation, correct.
And also in our package is the actual propositions, and proposition number 3 outlines the dollar amount, the additional dollar amount, right? So
I have that here.
that's what we'd be approving tonight, is that proposition.
What happens if
That's
it's
what I
turned
meant.
down?
If it's turned down, then we're right back to this. And I think you would have to go back to those questions that I had at the very end. Your,
Slide
You-
13 would come into play,
You're asking if it's voted.
deciding,
Up.
right, so if it is turned down, the additional funding, slide 13 would then need to be considered. Only air condition 3 of the schools, proceed with the funding that we have, postpone the project indefinitely, or decide to abandon the project completely. So those would be the 4 decisions we would have to come back and decide.
But it really goes back to letting the community decide what needs to be done.
Right, and they will do that
Yeah.
in May.
So yeah, I your question was good, Dr. Lippman, but I guess I looked at it the opposite way as I was thinking about this within the last couple of weeks. The fact that we rejected the bids, in my eyes, was us being very transparent with the community, saying we don't accept that it was so much more over budget. Let's let the community decide again.
Yeah.
Essentially, we're putting forth, okay, now we're okaying this money going forward. Now it's up to the community in May's budget vote.
Yeah.
To be honest, I thought it was more transparent, putting it back in the hands of the community and letting them understand that we are trying to be fiscally responsible with the money
I agree.
that is allocated.
I agree with you. Yes.
Absolutely.
Bond issue.
Tom, I have a question. I don't know if it's answerable. Is it what's the danger to the district if we fully fund this? Do you think there is a danger besides a unknown project that we might need to do in 5 years?
I guess I'll answer that 2 ways. The first thing you have to look at is the positive. You're putting air conditioning in the elementary schools, which is really what was requested and everyone supported going back to the 22 year. As far as on the financial end, the reserves that we have will be built up again. Provided there's no major state aid reduction or anything of that matter, we'll build them up. It may take a longer period of time because, you've got, quite a bit of money in there right now. But again, we're also on that proposition. You're seeing a proposition to add another reserve, and that's for an 18-year life. And that, I think, shows two things here, and goes back to Mr. Manna's idea of, how fiscally responsible is the budget and what are you looking at the future. That's what that's looking for. It's to build upon the future and knowing that, we're thinking forward. So I would say to you that a next capital project, this project itself is about a 4-year project. So if you think about we're a year delayed. The first construction won't happen until 2025. You're basically going to go to 2029. You have 4 years in that period of time to start to build up your reserves. And I think you may not get to $40 million, but you're probably going to be able to put some money into it, and that will help you in your next capital project. And I guess one more thing I will say, it's not only reserves that keep your projects tax neutral or no tax increases. The other important piece is doing pay downs, which is what the board did last May. You all were able to approve a pay down, and that helped us tremendously. So as you go forward, the board and this board and future boards will want to look at those pay downs and try and do something every year, so that you don't have that full debt coming on, because that helps you in future capital projects too.
And my last question is, if this was solely your decision, would you do it?
I would do it, and I'll tell you why. This is the only chance I see of air conditioning going in within a reasonable budget. Is it a lot of money? Yes. But I think you go back to what the initial request was, and you want to honor that. And so I always think about it that way. We want to honor what was originally thought through. And this is the way to do it, because honestly, I think in another year, it might be not just asking for 23 million essentially, but 33 million. And then you start to answer the question again, well, what's too much?
Thank you.
Any other questions, Dr. Littman?
Well, the other part of that is reimbursable.
Yes.
Yeah, so that people would know that, it's not costing all of that money, that the state aid will cover a big portion of that.
That's a very important point, Dr. Littman, because it's the way that we structure our budgets is that the building aid, because of the fact that we are paying debt off and we don't have to have increases our debt service, that aid supports the instructional budget. And if you don't do capital projects, the building aid amount is going to shrink. And so now, even if you get a foundation aid increase and the other increases, you may have a net increase of 0 because your building aid decreased and you didn't do a new capital project. So that's a very important point to make.
Okay. At this time, we welcome anyone in attendance who wishes to speak about the budget to step up to the podium at this time.
Thank you, Mark.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Mad rush.
Okay. May I have the motion to adopt and approve the resolutions for the annual district vote and authorize the public notices to be published as presented? Mr. Mehta? Mr. Bullen? Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. If attending the community forum, the forum will be held in KC Middle School Library immediately following this meeting, and our regular next board meeting is April 16th. May I have a motion to adjourn the special meeting budget work session? Dr. Littman? Mr. Bullen? All in favor?
Welcome.
Motion carries unanimously.